Hi guys, my name is Amit Alhuwalia. I am a certified car nut. My journey began when I was a little kid, playing with RC cars from the time when I was 7 years old. We were living in the Middle East at the time, and we went back to England for vacation. And I walked into Hemley's in London, which is the largest toy store in the world at the time. And going to Hemley's was just like the ultimate dream as a kid. You walk in, it's like 7 or 8 floors of just and different levels of toys. And on the upper floors, there was a whole auto car section. And there was these kits they were made by Tamiya, which was a Japanese company. I saw this kit. It was a Tamiya Falcon, was what it was. It was a 2-wheel drive little buggy, and it was a full kit. I was like, Dad, I really want this thing. And my dad was thinking, like, oh, this is something for a 14-year-old, and he's 7 years old. I don't know if it's gonna work. And we bought the kit, came back home, and I started building it. Started with my father, and pretty much quickly. It turned into that instead of my father helping me, I was just building it myself, and it was taking all the parts apart, following the directions, all the electronics, and that was my first foray into like really playing with cars and thinking about cars, and that's just my earliest memory of it all. Fast forward, going through university, I had a Honda Civic Si. That was my ultimate thing. I put little Integra GSR wheels on it. But I always dreamt about a BMW M3. From the Middle East, we moved to the United States and moved to Indiana. And I remember I was around 11 years old. We moved there in 1989, and I saw this red BMW with a little wing on the back drive by, and I was like, "What is that?" I had no clue what it was. And turns out it was an E30 M3, which is, most of the BMW guys know, that's kind of God's chariot in terms of the ultimate BMW, the one that everybody wants, the one that everybody talks about. And for me as a kid, seeing that thing, I was like, wow, look at that thing with the flares and the wing, and it's like looked like a little Matchbox car. So that was always in my head that, oh, someday I'm gonna have an M3. Fast forward, I went through college, and in 2000, December 2000, I took my last exam, and I hopped on a bus, on a Greyhound bus, and had 2 stops in Ohio. One was in Marietta, and one was, I believe, was in Columbus. And I went to go see 2 M3s. And I said I had a one-way ticket, and I was like, either I'm gonna buy the first one, or I'm gonna buy the second one. So I got off the bus on the first one, saw the first car. It was okay. The owner was a little bit sketchy. Got back on the bus, went another like 3 hours, got off, and this was a Cinnabar red with a tan interior. It was an 88, and I bought it right then and there. It was, I think at the time it was 2000. It was $11,000. I had prepared myself by selling my Honda Civic to some young kid in college, so I had the cash, and the cash that I got for that is what I bought the BMW with, the M3 with. So that started the whole journey. With that, I came back. I had finished college, and I moved back to Indiana. I immediately joined the BMW club, and signed up for a driving school. Never done any high performance driving before, and went to a club meeting, and they said, "Hey, you should definitely come out and try. You've got a great car to learn with." So did my first driving school in the summer of 2001, and then that just basically started the passion and the madness and everything that went with it. That has progressed now, evolved into that. I've had tons of different cars from that original M3 to I drove a lot of Minis when the new Minis came out. I've had 5 of those, and those were one of my favorite cars ever in terms of just how they were just happy. They handled really well. They weren't offensive. and they were just phenomenal on the racetrack and would just eat up BMWs and Porsches if you drove them correctly. So that led a lot of the journey, and in my process of moving to Canada in 2003, I had to let go of the M3 because I had bought a Mini at the same time. So the M3 left, and it was like my pride and joy, but I just couldn't afford or have space to keep both of them. And immediately a year after moving here, I just absolutely regretted selling it. I was like, what did I do? The hunt started again. And in 2005, I found a gray one, an 89, which I have to this day. It is my pride and joy. It is something that gets driven really hard, is kept really well, but it just puts that smile on my face every time I take it out. I also have a 1M, which was released in 2011, of which I did Euro delivery on. And that car is kind of special to me, as when I was in high school, my father had a E36 M3, a yellow E36 M3. It was a 95. And I always loved that look and that feel, and I always said to my dad, you know what, you've got to keep this for a while, and when you're done with it, I'll take it. And years went by, and my father, he said it was time for it to go, and I just didn't have any space living in Montreal downtown. I had the E30 M3, I had a Mini, and there was nowhere to put it. So my dad just sold it. He sold it super cheap. It was really well maintained, and after he sold it, he basically was he regretted it himself. That why did he sell it? You know, he's like, this is something that he should have kept. He could have kept it to drive on the weekends. And so he would always talk to me about that. So when this 1M came out, was coming out, I called my father and I said, hey Dad, you know what? There's a pretty special car coming out, and you know, I know you regretted selling that E36. So why don't we buy this thing together? You know, we could you know, I have the M3. We'll split it on the 1M, and we can do a European delivery on it, which is, there's a European delivery program where you purchase a car either in the US or in Canada, and you can actually have it delivered in Munich itself. And when you do that, they provide you with license and registration and insurance for up to 2 weeks, and you can go book a flight out there. They take care of everything, and you pick up the car, use it as much as you want for 2 weeks, and then drop it off in one of the major European cities, and they ship it back. And there's no extra charge to this program. And this is something that in college, I've always dreamt of. I would love to do the European delivery, just thinking about driving on all the roads and the mountain passes, and hopefully someday, you know, the Nürburgring. So this was the plan was hatched. I spoke to my dad. I said, listen, you know what? The orders are coming out on this coming Saturday. This was in, I would say, in March of 2011. And so I said, Dad, you know what? Go down to your dealership and see if you can get an allocation. So he was all excited. He's like, this is a great plan. You know, we could go do a trip together. So he went down. I called him that evening. I go, so how did it go? And he's like, oh, they only had 2 cars available, and so I couldn't get it. So the thing about this 1M, it was a very low production number. They were only released 740 cars in the United States and 220 for Canada. So there's only about 1,000 across all of North America that were for 2011. So I said, you know what? Okay, I will go down and to my dealership and see if I can get an allocation in Montreal. So I went down to Canbec through a friend who referred me, and I secured the last car that they had. It was, I think there were 6 allocated for Canbec. So I called my dad, and Dad's like, so did you get the car? Did you get the allocation? I told him, no, I didn't get it. So this hatched another plan of what am I going to do with this? So my father was turning 65 that year in September of 2011. And, you know, he was about ready to go through his retirement. So I made this plan that what I would do is I would take him and surprise him on this trip for his 65th birthday. So ordered the car, got it all done, called my mom. I said, Mom, I know Dad is still working, but I need you to organize that he gets a week off because I want to take him on a trip I know he's turning 65 in September, so I want to do something for him. She asked me, so what are you going to do? I go, I'm not going to tell you because I know you're going to ruin the whole scheme. So she said, okay. So there was a family wedding happening in Montreal in September, right around his birthday. It was like a week before his birthday. So I was like, oh, it's perfect. So the car was actually ready in August. My allocation, the car was produced in August. And I told Canbec, listen, I only want to pick it up in mid-September. So my parents and my whole family came up, my sister, my mom and my dad. And the plan was that they were going to stay the rest of the week and hang out for the summer, and we would go to Ottawa or go to Quebec City and, have a little family time. So the wedding gets done. It was Labor Day weekend, and on the Monday night, my dad, we're sitting in my living room, and my dad says to me, "Hey, what are we doing? What are we doing this week? Are we going to Ottawa? Are we going to Tremblant? What's going on?" I said, "Well, my mom and my sister and brother-in-law, they're actually heading home in a couple of days, and you and I are heading to Europe." And he's like, "What?" I said, "Yeah, we're going to Europe." I go, how we wanted to get that car, and we talked about this European delivery. He's like, "Yeah." I said, "Well, we didn't get the car, but I planned the trip anyway, and I rented a BMW, and we're gonna go out there for a week." And he was just dumbfounded, shocked. I was like, "Okay, this is great." So we took off, flew to Munich, and I had this whole route planned. I'd been like giddy as a little kid of planning of where we're going, starting in Munich. We're going to go down to Austria, go to Italy, go through Switzerland, and I had this route plan, and I'd printed out, I'd figured out what are the top 10 roads in Central Europe, the mountain passes, and I basically made a full route of to drive as many of them as possible. So we flew down there to Munich, and the first day we spent going around the city. And I said, "Oh, you know what, Dad, tomorrow we're going to go by the BMW museum, check out the museum, and then we're going to pick up our car and we're going to head on our trip." So morning, I can't contain myself. I'm just so excited because I know that morning we're picking up the car, and he has no clue. So we head to the Welt, which is the delivery center. It's right across from the BMW headquarters. So the campus has the headquarters, the museum, and the delivery center. And we walk in. He's like, "Where are you going?" I said, "Oh, let's go check out. This is where the delivery center is. Where they actually deliver the cars. We'll go check this out, then we'll go to the museum." So we walk in, and it's like a stunning building architecturally. Kind of very Frank Gehry-esque with the lines and the curves and stuff. And so we walk in, and there's this orange 1M sitting in the lobby, and I was like, "Oh, Dad, look, this is the car we were supposed to get, And he's like, "Oh yeah." I go, "That's really nice." And right next to the car was an elevator that actually took you up to the delivery center. And the main section is kind of for the public, and then the elevator is for clients that are actually going through European delivery. So I pushed the button on the elevator, and I go, "Dad, let's go in." He's like, "What are we doing?" And I said to him, "Oh, you know what we're doing today? We're getting a car today." And his smile on his face was incredible. And I actually have my camera, which I took a photo as soon as I told him, which I'll share with you guys. So yeah, so we went up, went through the whole delivery process, got all the registration. They showed us around the car. They had the car sitting on a round spinning a platform, and just the experience was amazing. And then from there we went to. Prior to leaving, leaving for Germany, I had contacted BMW Canada. And I said, "Listen, I'm a total BMW nut. I have an E30 M3, and I'm super excited about this car. And is there any way that we could go and visit the M Studios, which is where they do all the development work on the M car specifically? They're separate from the main headquarters." And the contact that I had in the BMW Canada, they arranged it. So we picked up the car, and these two interns showed up right as we came out, and they took us over to the M Studios. So we followed them over, and when we got there, they have their own special. It's a very kind of a small building with just a low-level offices, and there's like a gate that goes down into the garages for all the development stuff. They're completely separate from the main BMW. And we walk in there, and they have like a small little separate studio where they have a showroom of their M-specific cars. And in there, they had cool stuff, like there was an old M1, there was the MotoGP 1M car, there was a CSL, there was a lot of really stuff that I had never seen before. We walked in there, and they had the head of the BMW marketing. He came in to talk to us and tell us about like where the direction they're taking and what's the reason for this car and why it came about. And then what the great surprise was, they had one of the lead engineers on the car. He actually came in to speak with us, and his name was Jurgen. I can't remember his last name. But he came in, it was his day off, and he just came to tell us about like what went on in this development, how this car came about. And he was super excited to talk to us. He spent about an hour with us and just telling us, he's like, this thing started with me and my buddies that work in BMW M. We said, it would be cool like for us to just do a project car for ourselves. They went to their boss at the time and said, hey, can we work on a project car on our own time, And the boss said, yeah, it's no problem. You can do anything you want. You have access to any resources you want as long as it's after hours. It's up to you guys. So him and his 4 other buddies, they got together the first day and they said, what are we going to do? Let's build something. It's like five ultra smart engineers with all the BMW resources, whatever they wanted to do. The first thing they did, they went up into their private M garage, which holds all the M cars that were created, plus any of the project cars that previous engineers had built. And these are things like, we kind of, as from the public standpoint, sometimes we get a glimpse of them from spy shots, or we see them running around, but they're all, anything that's worked on is always kept at M in their private garage. So they went out there and they just drove everything from the original CSL M car to the M6s and M3s and like their project cars and like all these like Frankenstein things. And the car that spoke to them the most was the original E30 M3. And so they said, we got to see if we can make a modern version of this car. So what they do first, they went down, they said we need to get the lightest chassis, which was the 1 Series, started disassembling it, taking it apart. They took a electric saw to the quarter panels and just cut out all the fenders so they could fit on wider wheels and wider tires. They took the rear end from an M3 and made it fit. The same thing with the front end, brakes. So they basically just clobbered together all sorts of parts to build their own version. Got this thing done, and then they called their boss, say, hey, this is what we have. Their boss, his name was Dr. Ziegler. He was the head of M, and he was also responsible for a lot of the good of Mini. He went from Mini to the M division. He came out and he drove the car, and he freaked out over the whole thing and said, this is just unbelievable. We need to make this thing. He took it upon himself to try to push this into production. And the issue that he was having was at the time was the 1 Series was at the end of their production cycle. 2012 was the last year of production, and now this was all going on in 2010, all this development of what these engineers were doing. So the window was very small. And they had also switched over from an N54 to an N52 motor, which is from the 2-turbo to the single turbo. And the 1M, as they had developed it, was with 2 turbos. So that had already switched over in the 1 Series, kind of in the 135s. So the window for them to produce this was so narrow to get these cars, even if they greenlit it. So he went to the board and he showed him the car, and he said, we need to build this thing for the enthusiasts. This is the kind of direction that M needs to go. And the pushback was that they said, no, we don't see the business case. There's not enough time to do this thing. But he had the sense, he believed that this is what I had to do. So he came back, he brought in like the styling department to rework the flares of the car, and then he went to the marketing department and put together a quasi marketing campaign of how they would promote this thing as from a brand standpoint. When these exterior styling guys came and looked at the car, they said like, oh, you know, the car's too wide, we need to push the wheels in because it doesn't go with the body lines, like the flares are too much. And the engineers were totally like, no, you know what, if we do that, it's going to completely change the dynamics of the car. You guys need to figure out how to style this thing, leaving all whatever we have built from the engineering standpoint, leave it all as is. And Kyle Zegler, he was a proponent. He pushed back and was like, no, you got to do what these guys said. If we're going to put this car out, it's got to be like this. So that's why when you see it, it's got these massive flares on the rear and on the front, and it looks completely different from a regular 1 Series. With the marketing and the exterior styling and the engineering, Zegler took it back to BMW board, and they greenlit it. There was so much marketing that was attached to this thing. For a production run of just 9 months of how long the production run lasted, they did a series of phenomenal videos that went along with the car. They did a lot of print ad work. They did, and they also really connected with the BMW clubs and showed off the car to the clubs first. You know, that gave a lot of excitement in that aspect of it. The car has a phenomenal history, and Jürgen was so kind. He was so excited about that. He got to like talk to somebody that really appreciated, you know, what this is all about. That he even said, you know what, he was telling us about, oh, they changed the differential here and the suspension here and the brakes here, and he said, you know what, just come with me. And he walked out the door, we followed him out the door, and we walked down the whole garages, and we saw these prototypes everywhere, half camouflage, some things that I had seen as spy shots on the web, and they were like sitting right in front of me. We couldn't take any pictures, of course. And we kept on going down the lane, and there was like this, we got to this 1 Series that was completely beat up with like fender flares tacked on and was 2 different colors. And he goes, this was the project car. And he showed that was their first car that they built, and this was the same car that we had seen spy shots off on the internet. He was so great, and we got done, and I said to him, I go, you know what, Jerry, you got to do one more thing for me. I thank you so much. I appreciate like all the insight and the I can see the passion that's went into this thing. He said, what? I go, you need to sign my car. So he's like, oh yeah? He goes, where's the car? So I had a marker, and I have the hood is signed on the underside of the hood. It's got a signature with a date on it, and there's a couple of photos I have him and I with the car, and you know, and it was a great experience, and that was one of my favorite moments as a car guy. That thing, I love it to death. I don't baby it. I track it religiously. It did, I think, about 3,000 kilometers on track this summer. It goes through tires. It had rubber completely all over it at the end of the summer. It's something that I just love and appreciate so much. So one thing about this trip with my father that was really and special to me, and why I really savor this moment is, you know, as a kid growing up with your family, you know, you're always a child until you know you go through elementary school, high school, college, and then once you only kind of turn into your own being the further you get on in life. And so when I bought this car, I was in my mid 30s, or no 30, yeah, mid 30s, and I realized like my father didn't really know me in a way other than being a child, in terms of you know, as a man, what I think about, what am I passionate about, what really drives me, you know, what am I doing with my life, in my work, in my business, in my passions. He knew of it, but not to a level where we were close enough. And you know, we living here in Montreal and them being in Indiana, every time I would go home, it's going home to the family. It was never going home to like this one-on-one time. you know. So we would go pop over to the pub and have a pint, but I never had like a true bonding as much moment with my father as an adult. I finished high school, I went to university, I kind of did my own thing. I came back for a little bit, for about a year, but then I moved here to Canada. So the one thing that was ultra special for this whole trip was like we had 10 days of just getting in the car every day, finding the best road we could, stopping off for lunch, just talking about life, having a beer, and just kind of being that uninterrupted from my sister, from my family, from the kids, you know, from everything around you, and just him and I, and for a whole week straight. And he really got to understand like why I'm my passion about cars, passionate about all the things that I do, and it was just so memorable as a trip. And the other thing we did was like, you know, he didn't understand of you know, me as a driver, how I was, and taking him up these mountain passes and flying around, and we even went to the Nürburgring, and the car did 4 laps of the ring. Him passenger once, but he couldn't handle any more than that. So I think that was one of the greatest things, is that when we finally left each other in Frankfurt, we were at the airport and gave each other a hug, and it was like just tears, you know, of like, wow, this was just such a great bonding experience as you know, as adults finally, and it just brought us so much closer than I'd ever been. So that was a great moment of the whole trip.